Good evening, everyone. Give us a moment while I get everything set up for our session and say hi to Miriam.
Hi, good evening here. I'm in California, but good evening to others.
Starting our live stream, so it takes a moment.
Oh yeah, we've had to switch to online formats for faculty interviews, and so we're super familiar with the additional setup.
It looks to me like the stream is live, so we're just about ready to start. As I said, welcome to everyone. Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. To our Career Masterclass, part of a series about how ambition cannot be locked down. So today's session is readjusting your career success strategies for the pandemic and some proven career growth hacks for 2022. Our guest today is Miriam Veiss Creque, the Academic Operations Manager at the Byers Eye Institute at Stanford University School of Medicine. My name is Stuart Creek, so there's a personal relationship here as she is my eldest daughter. So, hi, Miriam. And just to remind folks about the use of WebEx, you can put your questions for Miriam in the Q&A box, and these questions will get compiled, and I'll ask her the questions in the Q&A section of the presentation. If you put it in a chat, it should just allow you to send that to all panelists. Other participants won't see your message, but we will. And so again, if you have a question for Miriam, best to put it in Q&A. If it ends up in chat, we'll try to catch it there as well. We do have a couple of polls today during the presentation, and just to get us warmed up, let us start with the first question here, which is, how much experience do you have? Part two, how are you feeling today? If you are in the live stream, watching on YouTube, you can put your answer into the comments. We asked that second question, by the way, during this pandemic because it's affected people in different ways. So we hope that you're all doing well. We'll see in about 10 seconds from now what the results of the poll are. Yeah. So Miriam, this is a broadly balanced group of people in terms of years of experience, with the biggest cohort being people with 10 or more. Fortunately, everybody's doing pretty much in the middle or thumbs up. We do have about a sixth of the respondents who said they're not doing so well today. So hopefully after they hear some of your advice that will give them a better outlook. And with that, I will introduce you formally to the audience. As I mentioned, Miriam is the Academic Operations Manager at the Byers Eye Institute of the Stanford University School of Medicine. Her position makes her a human resources executive there, who is responsible for helping all of the stakeholders that work at the Institute to develop their careers to their fullest potential. And her background is in psychology. She has a BA from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a master's from Argosy University. So she is a well-qualified expert, and we're glad to have her. And Miriam?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stuart, for having me this morning. It's nice to be back with Simplilearn. I know I did a webinar right around the beginning of the pandemic. And so it's kind of nice to be able to share some updates. And I'd like to start by kind of going over my journey with Stanford, both pre and post lockdown. So I started with Stanford in September of 2018. I was hired as the Human Resources and Faculty Affairs Administrator. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what faculty affairs really was, but I looked into it and found out that faculty affairs is what I call the human resources for faculty development. So I help with the recruitment, appointment, promotion, development of faculty, as well as the staff of the Byers Eye Institute. And I do want to note that kind of one of the things I want to point out, I was overqualified by this role. And by overqualified, I mean that I had an advanced degree, I had experience in another professional area, this was an administrator role, but I knew it would be a good foot in the door and a really good opportunity for growth. I knew Stanford was a good institution to work for, and I figured this would be a good opportunity to get in. I do want to note that based on my personal situation that I was in, I was able to take this job. The compensation worked for me, but I do want to note that sometimes taking a job that you're overqualified for may not work for you if the compensation isn't something that supports your life. So I do just want to note that. But very quickly, I came in and was able to learn the tasks assigned to me. And then during the first few months that I was there, my manager was having some things going on, and she effectively went on leave in the summer of 2019. So, a little over 6 months into my tenure. And at that time, I was able to kind of step in and take over quite a few of the ongoing open projects that she had been working on. I was able to very quickly make some very high impact changes, and it was really visible to both management, the department chair in my department, and that was really a great opportunity. So then by November of that year, she had officially resigned, and I was named the full-time promoted manager in that position. Stuart, if you want to advance the next. So I do want to note that this concept of being at the right place at the right time is something I really am aware of happened with this role. If I had not had the manager leave at that time, if I hadn't been in the position I was in, I wouldn't have just been able to walk into a management role at Stanford. On to the next one. Next one. So as we know, in March of 2020, that's when lockdown started, at least here in California. March of 2020 was right in the middle, basically, of where I am now in my journey of Stanford. Again, I'd only been there about 1.5 years. I was a new manager. I was managing human resources during an extremely impactful time. And so in this very short period of time, things kind of had to shift even more. I was able to take over setting out communications to the department. Because I have a background in counseling, I was finding that I had employees that I was working with who were far more distraught than usual. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about our personal lives, our health, our safety, security. We were very, very lucky in our department that we had no layoffs from the pandemic. We only had one layoff during that time, and it was because it was a grant-funded project that ended. But nobody had to lose their job in our department, so we were very fortunate to have that happen. So during this time, I actually was so successful in the role that I proposed taking over another service area around the end of 2020, and that was our education programs. And to be transparent, the first job I applied for in this department was the residency and fellowship manager, so managing education programs. But at that time, they were more interested in having me come into the HR and faculty affairs realm. So it kind of came full circle. And by January of 2021, I was promoted to the academic operations manager, as I had now 3 service areas, including education. Our education programs include a accredited residency program. We have 6 clinical fellowships, and we also have various international rotations for both clinical and research scholars from around the world. So it's a pretty big impact. And so by the end of this 3-year journey, September just came by, I went from managing a staff of 3 before the pandemic started and none when I started at Stanford, to now my staff is 8. And from the time I started at Stanford, my salary has increased 80%, 26% since the lockdown started. I checked my numbers this morning. So clearly I was able to not only progress before the lockdown, but actually had this amazing period of professional growth since the lockdown happened. And I really attribute that to some of the skills that I had from other jobs and from not being a specialist in my role. So we're going to go to a second poll now. We'd like to know where people are working from. Are you working from home, fully? Do you sometimes visit your office? Are you in a hybrid situation? Are you fully in the office, or are you between opportunities? So our role right now, most of us are hybrid. We do go into the office 1 to 2 days a week. Since we have service areas that directly serve client-facing populations, we have our students, our faculty, and our staff. But for example, our finance team has been fully remote.
Close the poll in 20 seconds.
Great. And I know I've seen a lot of companies announcing their plans to stay fully remote. Our company right now is kind of in a whatever works for the team situation. We'll see how that goes. Cool. So it looks like we have a majority of people are fully remote. We have several who are between opportunities, and then we have a pretty even split between hybrid and fully on-site. And we definitely recognize that, based on your role, you might need to be on site. For example, we have bench scientists in our department, and of course they can't, take care of mouse colonies or perform viral assays when they're working remote. So thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead to the next slide.
I just wanted to make a comment. There's been a number of studies recently that have talked about the difference between essentials and remotes. And it's kind of counterintuitive, the words, because essentials mean people who have to be on site. So it's essential for them to be out making deliveries or working at the lab bench or that type of thing. And remotes are people who can do their work from home, but it doesn't really reflect who's essential to the company. And
right.
So it's a little bit confusing there. So you spoke about your personal journey, and can you comment to folks about how agility and adaptability helped you in that, and also how that will help them?
Absolutely. So I want to kind of address what does it mean to be agile and to be adaptive. And so agility you can think of as being able to move, or in this case, think and understand quickly. And adaptable means you're able to adjust to new conditions. So of course, right away, the pandemic required both of these, because we had a very sudden change. Some people had the presence of mind to start planning as they saw how things were going coming out of Wuhan. And other companies, we went to work on a Friday, and then that Monday we were told everyone's working from home. So of course, it necessitated a kind of quick pivot to this new working environment, and you had to adapt to new rules, new regulations, new socioeconomic pressures. The socio-political sphere was very charged here in America. But I want to address again this idea of right place at right time, because it sounds like it's just luck. It's just serendipity. Oh, I happen to be, in this department when the manager left and it just worked out. But that's not really the case. You can increase your chances of being in the right place at the right time by being agile, by being adaptable, by having an expanded set of skills in your tool belt. Because the more things you can do, the more gaps you can fill, the more opportunities will come, and the more places you can end up in that will lead to these offers for advancement. So you can draw from your experiences. I did not have a linear path to get to my current position. I have retail experience. I used to work in a residential home for children when I was doing my master's degree. I have therapeutic experience with children and adults. I had not ever had a formal HR position before, but I had been an academic counselor. I had worked with people. I've taught psychology courses. And so I really knew that I had a wealth of experience to draw from so that I could understand the conceptual knowledge that I needed for my role, and then I could learn the skills, the technical things that I needed. The more open you are to learning, the more you're able to challenge and change yourself, you'll find that those opportunities grow. It would have been a very easy path as far as a linear path to finish my master's degree, find a job where I could get the hours I needed to be a licensed therapist and then be a therapist. But I knew when I finished my degree that wasn't the path I wanted. So I took all of these different experiences I had, I drew on my training, and I reformatted my career into something that I felt I really wanted to do and that would offer more opportunities to move forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? So one of the things that I wanted to ask is, over the past 12 to 18 months, about the pandemic length and giving a little period for adjustment, how satisfied have you been with growth opportunities in your current role? If you're currently between opportunities, you can address, previous roles, or even as a job seeker, and, opportunities for growth or for roles further than your skill set. So we're seeing if you're very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, kind of in the middle, somewhat dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. Again, this is for growth opportunities. I will say that's probably one of the issues I had brought up to me very quickly by several people. They were concerned about, did this lockdown mean, well, yes, I have my job, I have security, but do I still have an opportunity to grow? And so having to balance both this idea of, keeping things stable with being able to move things forward was very important. So it looks like we have a pretty big split, with not too many of you being very satisfied. It's kind of all centered in the middle there. Some are very dissatisfied, which I am sorry to hear that, but hopefully, again, some of this information can help you to think of ways that you can kind of grab the bull by the horns a little bit. And then, of course, we hope as institutions adjust to our new normal, we'll see people having more robust kind of remote training and growth development plans. Stuart, did you have any comments on this one?
It's interesting. There's two comments. One on agility, which early in the pandemic, I attended an online webinar, and the executive said if they had told us that we needed to move everyone to work from home, we would have said, sure, give us 6 months and $10 million. We'll get it done. And in the event, she said, we got it done in 2 days with no budget. So that's the kind of
exactly
agility that we've all been forced into in a certain way. As far as growth opportunities, yeah, I've also had an eclectic career, and sometimes there have been growth opportunities. Other times it seems like you're in a slot, and that's kind of where everybody sees you. So it is good to know that there are ways to look around that and look past that. So we talk about how ambition can't be locked down and things that have been, some things have been limited, but what are the things in your opinion that haven't been limited by the circumstances of the pandemic?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the thing that comes to mind the most with what has been limited is the ability to interact face to face, to congregate, to get into groups with people. And I think for a while that was really hard for people to adjust to. But some things have definitely not been limited. And I actually think that quite the opposite. Your ability to pursue learning has, if anything, grown because there is a new credence to online and self-directed learning that I did not see before. I will say that when I came into my HR role, I had a few managers I worked with who, if they saw a professional school on your resume or that you indicated you did an online degree, they had a bias that wasn't as good, that you weren't as skilled, that you didn't have as much knowledge as those who had done an in-person learning experience. My master's degree was hybrid, and I needed to work while I was doing my master's. I couldn't become a full-time traditional student again. And so I knew when I came into HR that I valued online degrees. I valued those who can demonstrate that they were able to juggle education with a job, with their life. I think that shows tremendous resilience and an ability to really be successful in roles that require a lot of prioritization, of really understanding your own skill set. So I absolutely encourage people right now to, use this time where you might have slightly more flexibility without having to commute, where you're realizing that your company is allowing you to have flexibility with your hours. Pursue learning opportunities. I took finance for non-finance managers just a few weeks ago. And it was really, really helpful. And it wasn't something that before I'd had kind of the time to do because I couldn't find a strong online format. And Stanford, luckily with continuing studies, offered a very strong online class that I was able to take in the evenings. If you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So as we've already addressed, this need for agile, flexible employees has not been limited. If anything, it's grown. If anything, we need to see that people were able to successfully transition to this new market, to this new world of increased digital communication, of increased accountability and independence in our jobs. So there's been constant changes in the social climate, in the policy landscape. We've had to send emails to the department saying, that email you just got from Central HR, don't do anything. The policy changed yesterday. Please hold. And that takes a certain amount of adaptability, of ability to think on your feet. And being flexible includes being flexible with what you see as your perfect path. If you stay really focused on, okay, I want to be a project manager, like I have to be a project manager, you might block out other opportunities for growth. You might not take a role that project management isn't the main duty, but you'll get exposed to it and therefore grow. You might not take a role with a company where, the job isn't exactly what you want it to be, but they have very strong benefits for staff development, and you can take advantage of those benefits to develop your learning. So it's really important to recognize, who's going to move forward in this environment and who's going to kind of limit themselves or be limited by the environment versus adapting, changing, and flexing with the environment. You can go on to the next slide. And then opportunities. I, of course, understand this. We have participants from all over the world, but I wanted to quickly share some data. In the US, this was from September of 2021, they added 194,000 jobs, unemployment fell, the hourly wage went up. So as much as it might feel like it's not the right market right now, there are opportunities. They, again, might not be the exact opportunity you want. It might not be that perfect fit. But if anything, I want you to take away from this webinar that you don't need to fit the round peg into the square hole. You need to learn how to become a square peg when you need to be one, if that makes sense. You can go ahead to the next slide. And then, of course, we need to
Yeah,
address.
I
Yes.
was going to say that that's an interesting metaphor, to become the square peg when you need to be one. And being able to pull in the things you're not using at the moment and push out the other skills that you have had in reserve is an interesting way of changing shape that way.
Absolutely. You can't change your environment too much usually. I can't have changed where I was in Stanford when I first started, but what I did find was that, I started as the square or the round peg, to use that metaphor. And as I pulled in more information, as other parts came out, like you said, I suddenly found that I was able to fit into the need, that I took what was needed, took what I knew how to do, and synthesized those together. And I didn't have the perfect resume. My director told me about a year into my time at Stanford that he straight up would not have hired me with my resume, but I happened to have had good references, and I was very persistent. And he's very glad he hired me because it worked out for what he ended up needing. It's not always just the job that's posted that is the true need. So there you go.
That leads us to another part of agility in that the world has been getting more digital for a number of years. It's a big trend in the working world and in enterprises before the pandemic, and after the pandemic, it became a matter of business survival for companies to be able to do work online, to offer products online, to support interactions with customers online and suppliers online. So you can see from the illustration, it's a person who's working in a lab or a person who's a healthcare worker might not have thought of themselves as a digital worker, but now, today, it's necessary to know how to do your work using digital tools. And that applies across the board to almost every field. So let's talk a little bit, if you will, about how people need to be open to transforming as the world around them transforms to digital.
Yeah, I'd like to even share that. So I work in an eye institute. We work in an ophthalmology department. And very quickly, our doctors realized that telehealth was going to be difficult for ophthalmologists because they need to be able to examine your eye. So we've actually seen some amazing advancements in this short time with instruments that can attach to iPhones that can facilitate much more ethical eye exams. We also have had doctors who've become credentialed out of state so that they can read imaging and things like that. And even in that sphere, in the healthcare realm, we've seen this boom of digital and technologically kind of sponsored transactions or whatever. So absolutely, digital work affects every industry right now. So one thing that I've noticed, especially for our teams, for the operational staff, is there's more of a need to identify and self-identify development opportunities. My manager's not right down the hall anymore. We're not talking daily, popping in, having those kind of offhand chats about, oh, this is kind of what I want to do. So there's this need when you're at home, when you're doing work, there's not someone there to turn to and say, hey, how do I do this really quick? There's this need to kind of enhance your own skill set. And what I've done is actually found some gaps in my institutional knowledge. If I know where I am right now, and I know the next step is potentially a director position, I need to go outside of the areas that I'm already comfortable in, and I need to learn grants administration. As I shared, I was taking a finance class. These are the gaps in my own knowledge, and these are the areas I've self-identified that will lead to new things. They're not the areas that I need to learn right now in my current role to keep doing my job well. They're the areas I need for the next role, for my next opportunity. And so this is a great experience right now for me to say, okay, when I'm at home doing my work and I know that there's something I need, how can I learn to do this? How can I find the resources that I need to allow me to do this effectively? If you want to go ahead to the next slide. This ties into this idea of a self-service model. So I'm not sure how it has been with your companies or places you've worked. But we've really tried to increase this idea of self-service. I love when my employees, when my staff say, oh, you know, that thing that I asked you about, I emailed you the other day, you know, I don't need it anymore. I actually figured it out on my own. I love it even more if they don't email me first and they figure it out. But those who know how to use their resources wisely, how to independently and proactively evaluate if they need assistance or if they have the tools to complete a task, those are going to be the most successful employees. They can find information, they can use that information effectively. It's not to say that I'm not there to support my team or that management doesn't have a responsibility to provide adequate training and support. But the ones that are going to really excel are the people who have found ways to adapt to this digital environment and still move themselves forward, still propel their careers. So I really can't encourage you enough to think about if you were your own academic advisor, if you were your own career counselor, if your friend came to you for help, what would you tell that person? What would you say, you know, that you need to learn more of? What skills do you need to develop? So I really encourage you to think about all the resources out there. Don't limit yourselves to the ones that are immediately available or easiest to find. Do the research to find the ones that work for you. To the next. And then interpersonal skills look different. So as we've already talked about, we can't gather face-to-face in most instances. We do have some people who are working in a hybrid environment like myself, where you are going in, you are having chances to interact face-to-face, but I would say 95% of my interaction with people at work these days is in a digital setting or rarely on the phone, but most of it's texting, instant messaging, emails, and Zoom. It's not the same as connecting in person. I can't make eye contact in the same way. I can't, you know, right now I'm not looking directly at the camera as I'm speaking. You know, if we were in a room together, I'd be speaking to all of you. We aren't able to have physical contact, you know, in those serious moments where, you know, a hug or just a hand on the arm might be helpful. Even things like I've had to lay off and terminate people, and doing that in a Zoom setting is so uncomfortable. It's very impersonal. Of course, there's this kind of protection that comes with it, but you can't have that same kind of unspoken physical interaction energy that happens. So in a digital world, you have to kind of take that extra step. You need to be more intentional with your connections. And you also need to remember not only to connect with those in your sphere of direct influence. If I only talked to my staff and my director and then the faculty that I'm serving, how would I know about what other departments are doing? How would I know about what best practices to adopt for my own work? How would I learn about new opportunities with other organizations? Or, you know, even I have a colleague in another department who is very into data analytics, and she will, when we connect, she will share different courses that she's taken. She will share, you know, information and resources. And I have to make sure that I'm intentionally reaching out to the people that I would normally maybe get to see at an all hands on deck HR meeting, or that I might attend a regular debriefing with. So interpersonal skills, I cannot emphasize enough, are important. And especially if you're interviewing digitally, you want to be able to come off as warm and personable. And how do you do that when you're sitting behind a camera, maybe with a fake background? You know, maybe you have a cat on the ground meowing at you, kids running around in the back. Vulnerability, authenticity, those are also helpful. We're at a point with almost every interaction we have, if someone has kids around and they start to apologize, it's not a problem, I understand. You know, don't be ashamed to bring your full self into your interactions, and especially when we're all in our homes, that's really important. As I say that, there's a cat behind me. If you want to go ahead to the next slide. And then finally, or Stuart, did you have any commentary?
Well, there's, I think, a rule that says that if your cat climbs into the camera view, you have to hold it up to the camera so everyone can see it. But that's just me because I'm a cat person like you. So we kind of, as I talked about before, there's times when you feel like you're in a pigeonhole, a slot that they've picked for you, and you want to break out of that. You want to see different opportunities for yourself, or a different future for yourself. So let's talk in a little bit about how visualizing that future and setting those goals, and how to set those goals. Because we've had questions coming in through the chat from people who are looking to get their first job. There are questions from people who have been laid off or that type of thing. And there are people who want to get out of a stagnant situation. So can you talk about how goal setting helps with that?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most important things to think about is this idea of intentionality and cultivation. Anyone who's ever tried to grow something, so I kill everything I try to grow except succulents. I can keep those alive. And that's because I realize I don't have enough will and intentionality in my gardening to keep other things alive. That's fine. But in your career, you can cultivate almost any skill or quality. You really can. It takes intentionality, it takes practice. So no matter your learning style, if you're a visual, an auditory learner, if you need to be hands-on, there are ways to develop yourselves. And it doesn't always matter about your access to resources. You do not have to take a course in public speaking and have that on your resume to develop your public speaking skills. You can join Toastmasters if you have that available to you. I had an old colleague who was whatever it is, a master Toastmaster when I was out in Hawaii, and he was just a phenomenal speaker. And it was through years and years of storytelling and practice. And in any meeting he was in, he knew how to make his point, how to express himself, how to use his time wisely. It was phenomenal. But none of us have access to Toastmasters. Form a group of friends. I don't know how many of you heard about PowerPoint parties. They were kind of big last year when people were really locked down. And that was just this idea of getting together with a group of friends or colleagues and taking 10 to 20 minutes to do a short PowerPoint on an area of interest to you. And what's the point of that? It helps you learn how to use your time wisely, how to create visuals, how to impart information effectively in a digital environment. It's tremendously important. It's so important that that's what I have my team doing right now. Coming up to the end of the year, we're using our team meeting time, and they're each doing 20-minute presentations on something in their service area, because I noticed right away that we had an issue with presenting in a digital audience. They really needed that opportunity to practice. And if you don't have that access, if you're by yourself, speak out loud to your pets. That's fine. Stuart, I think we moved ahead a little in the slides. But even if you don't have someone around, if you have pets, if you have kids, you can, perfect. You can figure out ways to practice your public speaking, even if it's in the mirror. Sometimes just practicing something over and over and over makes you good at it. If you are trying to learn about Excel, just go online and grab data sets. You don't have to have real data to work with. When I was teaching statistics, I used to just make up data sets for the students to run sample t-tests on. It doesn't have to be, overly thought out, but you can cultivate skills. Sometimes though, it's important to figure out what those skills are. And then also to recognize where your previous experiences, even if not obviously related, are going to help you. And with that, if we go to the next slide, one thing we really want to think about is how much are we limiting ourselves? So I know that there's probably several people who are thinking, okay, this is helpful for working professionals. I haven't started work yet. Especially those of you who maybe don't have the most traditional path, don't limit yourself. Don't think of periods of unemployment as weaknesses. Don't think of periods where maybe you've had to focus on family as disruptions in your career path. But in essence, those are completely unique experiences that require a tremendous amount of problem solving, of agility, of adaptability. So I really encourage people to start talking about your unusual career path. Start practicing how you would talk to someone if you met them in a networking opportunity about the fact that you haven't been working for a while. But what have you learned? What have you done while you haven't been working? What has needing to be thrifty helped you to learn? Have you had to prepare a budget for yourself? Have you had to teach children at home? Are you suddenly, multitasking between job searching and homeschooling? These are all, what's the word? Sorry. These are all assets that you can bring. I have several people that I work with who are first generation, have had to care for elderly parents. And the amount of work that it takes and coordination that it takes to care for an elderly parent, these people are amazing schedulers. They are absolutely fantastic project managers. They really know how to work with people. And those aren't skills that you can just necessarily learn only in a job environment, learn only in a professional setting. So then, and I also just want to note, there's also a huge shift in the United States and many industries towards looking at what we think of as DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. The way Stanford has been conceptualizing that is actually what we're calling distance traveled. So we want to hear about your path. We want to hear about your journey from where you started to where you are now, and respecting, understanding, and mostly valuing those unique experiences. I'm seeing that so much more than I've seen in any other time of working in any other social climate where people really are valuing the ability to kind of come through something resiliently, and that includes periods of unemployment. And so I think we have another poll. I see a different poll. There we go. My manager, supervisor, the organizational leadership does a very good job of developing employees. True or false? And again, if you're not working right now, if you were somewhere previously, you can answer off that. And it's also helpful to think about, in this case, not your own role in your development, but the supervisor, manager, or leadership's role. Because I would say, I don't necessarily have an especially strong manager for development. I've developed myself, but that I've been able to take advantage of resources from the institution that are very helpful. Second slide. And I see that we have most of us, over half responded false, and of course not everyone participated. And I am sorry to hear that, but I also, again, think that's why it's so important to really think about what you can do to fill those gaps for yourself. And then that takes us to our final section.
Right, so I think this is kind of the highly anticipated part of the presentation about what kind of practical steps people can take to ensure that their career is moving the way they want it.
Sure. So this is, this is the hard part, is we all want to control our career destiny, and we can't, but there's some things that we can do to kind of help guide us on that path that we want to make it more preferable. And one of those is really, it might be counterintuitive, but be a generalist. Don't just limit your learning and your development to a narrow area. There's generalists and there's specialists, right? I was reading an article preparing for this, and this one phrase really stuck out to me, and that was that the multi-utility players fill succession boxes while specialists fill the roles. So I really want you to think about that. And there's nothing wrong with being a specialist. You can develop and be very skilled in your one area. But if advancing into the C-suite, or if leading a diverse team that takes on many different service areas is your goal, you really need to diversify your skill set. I've had experience working with children. I've had experience with cash handling and retail management and dealing with difficult customers. And all of these things really fed into my success at working in HR, at servicing faculty, right? So if you have the opportunity to take, a finance class for non-finance majors, to understand, if you work in an organization where they're applying for grants, look at the grant application cycle, look at compliance, understand what an IRB is, understand what they're doing in research and development. It doesn't mean you have to go get multiple degrees and have certificates in everything you do, but a more generalized path, the more general knowledge you bring, the more perspective you're going to have, the more you're going to be able to synthesize all these different parts when you're looking at a problem, and potentially the more effective you'll be. So again, I really want you to think about this idea of, who do you see moving up? What are those people's experiences and credentials? I personally do not see a whole lot of people with a very linear path in the positions that I report to. Most of them have diverse experiences, and they draw on those diverse experiences. They see them as beneficial, not as something they have to apologize for. If we go on to the next slide, the other thing to think about too is, when you're setting goals, being realistic and setting short and long-term goals is important. So earning a certificate, maybe 3 or 4 classes, is more of a short-term goal. I have a certificate in community college faculty preparation that was a 1-year program that I did before I started teaching that was really, really beneficial. And the last part of it was an externship where I was placed in a class, and I ended up actually teaching that person's class after they left. That was a short-term goal that actually helped with a longer-term goal I had of becoming a faculty member. But even further than that, if you're thinking of advancing into the C-suite, again, if you want to be a project manager, a program manager, you really want to think about, what are those shorter term goals I need to get through. For those of you who are in school right now or just finishing school, that was a huge goal. And it was really more of a long-term goal when you think about it. But now you have to start setting smaller goals. Even if that smaller goal is just, I'm going to send 10 resumes today. Those are small goals. And the more you can set those, the more you can kind of see little wins along the way, the more momentum you'll keep up, and the more motivation. And it's also just, it doesn't make sense to have a one narrow long-term goal that you're looking at without trying to figure out in between, what are those things that are going to help me to achieve more happiness, more stability, whatever it is right now. And those short-term goals are going to be very important for that. So for me, for example, my short-term goal is to finish. There's a curriculum that I can do for free at Stanford on grants management. Because I work so closely with faculty who have to apply for grants, I want to understand what they're going through. And then finally, I know people say this all the time, but I especially right now in this environment of not always being as connected, my last tip is really to seek mentorship. We want to head to that last slide. Connect with those who have careers you admire or achievements you admire. Don't just say, okay, well, this person also has an MBA, so I'm just going to ask them. Are they in a position that you want to be in? Are they kind of at a place in their career where they seem to be happy, they seem to be thriving, and it's something you want to be able to replicate in your own? It's so important to get insight from people who have been there, and especially for people who are from underserved or under-resourced backgrounds. If you can connect with someone who not has the exact same life experience, but who's also had to go through things that maybe the majority groups have not had to, that can also really help to be able to see there is a way forward. There are going to be hurdles. It is going to be hard, but so-and-so did it. This is how they did it. I can do it too. I am very, very, very lucky to have several people in my past that have been excellent mentors. Sometimes they've also been my managers. I know that's very rarely the case. But it's just so important to really understand how having someone who isn't responsible for your performance appraisal, who isn't involved in the day-to-day dynamics, can give you some perspective, can give you some insight and guidance on what it's going to be like for you on your journey. And even just having that person to connect with, to be in your corner, can be very helpful. You know, it's hard sometimes to find a mentor. I definitely recommend, If there's virtual conferences you can go to, webinar type things, if there's any virtual networking opportunities presented, those are great opportunities. We just did a mixer for our mentorship program in the School of Medicine, and it was amazing how much you can actually learn about each other in such a short time. All right, and that brings us, I believe, to our final poll. Stuart.
Yeah, this is a poll that asks about some of the things that Simplilearn does, having to do with business and digital skills. So as Miriam said, it's important to be what some people call the T-shaped professional, where your skills are broad across the different number of categories. That's the top of the T. And then they're deep in your area of specialty, forms the body of the T. So here's a question, a chance to think about what you'd like to add to your repertoire or what you'd like to deepen your experience in, and when you'd like to do that. So we have the answers. And it's interesting because the pattern follows the list of skills in order, from most popular to least, more or less, with business and project management being of most interest. And it's good to see that about half of the respondents here have said they'd like to get started right away, which is always the best time to get started on something that will take you closer to your goal. So thank you for that. And from that, we're going to go into the Q&A. And going to all right, we're on, and I will pull up the questions. So we have a few. So Rahul has just a comment, but I thought it was kind of an ironic one. It said he found a great opportunity to make a career transition in a new direction that happened during the pandemic. The only drawback is he did it when he lost his job. So that's a case of a person being agile, flexible in the face of the challenges of the pandemic and being forced into a shift that he didn't necessarily want to make at that time. So Rehimar has a question, and this one I think you're specifically best at answering. Balancing work and growth opportunities online can be tricky. And sometimes I feel burnout and it takes a lot of toll on my mood for growth and upskilling. Do you have any advice for this personal issue?
You know, I agree. There were nights when I had my finance class and I just had a long day and I didn't really want to deal with it. I think that the most important thing I can tell you is to have a kind of mind for self-care, to recognize where your energy is being allotted and to do your best to kind of create boundaries. And I know that can be hard. I know not every work environment is amenable to creating boundaries, but you know, one thing that our team really tries to do is we have a stop time where we're not supposed to ask each other for things. If you're working after 5, that's fine. I'm not working after 5. And we kind of do that to help each other have boundaries. I also, you know, if there's ways to find making your development fun, I know that sounds silly, but, you know, if there's someone that you can study with, if there's kind of a non-traditional way that you can get those skills, some of the online courses too, some of the people putting out online courses, really, it's almost kind of entertaining while you're taking them. So reading reviews from people, seeing what they're saying about these things, and then don't feel like you have to force yourself or rush yourself. I know it's hard to be patient, especially if you're in a job you don't really love, or if you're between work and you're feeling the pressure. But this is stuff that takes some time. It's, you know, there's several people I've talked to where it's really been a better idea for them to take maybe a part-time job or even something totally, you know, customer service oriented while they're finishing their degree or while they're finishing a certificate program. So they have that ability to bring in some income while they're still focusing on their longer term goal. But really, you know, it's just about trying to have those boundaries when you can and trying to find opportunities for rest. You know, if there's days you can do less Zoom if you're a very Zoom heavy person, or less looking at the computer, if there's lessons you can listen to and then do the work, things like that. Try to break up the different, you know, not just staying at a computer all day. That can be difficult. Yeah.
We also had a past webinar. I think you can find it on our Simplilearn YouTube channel. Thinking it was with Matt Bailey, and it was Jeff Allen maybe, on project management techniques. And I bring it up because one of the techniques he talked about was time boxing, where his advice is segment your day so that you have specific amounts of time that you will work on a particular task. So, you know, I'm going to work on this task for 30 minutes, work on the task for 30 minutes, stop, move on to the next task so that you don't get sucked into something and keep working on it until you burn out. So there's some resources you can look at there. And Christian Keita asks, you know, his comment was the feeling of presentation is highly helpful for a current professional, but for someone who's looking to land a job, what advice do you have for somebody who's into it? And it relates to another question from Abiel, who asks, aren't companies looking for particular experience rather than general?
Sure. So, you know, it of course depends on the role. When we hire a financial analyst, they have to have financial experience. I can't convince someone who has no financial experience that they're going to fit into that peg, right? And I'm not saying, you know, walk into something you're completely unqualified for and just convince them you can do it. If there are particular skills you need to have or certifications, absolutely pursue those. But what I'm kind of suggesting is don't limit yourself to only looking at the jobs that have the title you think you want. If it says data scientist, that's great, but there's a lot of other jobs. Even my residency coordinator is starting to learn Tableau so that she can do some things with people analytics in our programs. Look for jobs that will offer you ways to gain on the job experience in something. If you know you want to be a project manager one day on, you know, different technical things, you don't have to necessarily take a job with a tech company. You can take a job in education. You can take a job for a nonprofit. Learn those skills in other ways. I know it's very difficult to with interviews, so I recommend literally practicing. I've had friends that I do mock interviews with. Having that ability to run through your own little pitch about yourself, to go through your experience and to get feedback from someone can be so helpful. I had someone, this is the first time in my whole life that I've actually had someone at the end of an interview we did together stop and say, do you mind if I ask, how do you feel that went? How was the interview? I was not the decision maker. I was not the hiring manager for the role. So I felt like, you know, it was appropriate to talk to her about it. But when you can ask for that feedback, and don't say, well, what did I do wrong? You know, just how was that? You know, do you have any advice for how I could have better articulated this particular point? Get that feedback when you can. I can't recommend enough practicing, not rehearsing so that you have a script that you're giving, but practice talking about how, oh, during this period of unemployment, I've actually developed quite a good skill set for, you know, detail orientedness and time management. I've been managing my job search. I have 15 open applications that I'm working towards. I stay in contact with everyone. I'm following up. And that's a skill set that I can bring to this role because it's taught me X, Y, and Z. It's again, not about taking something so far away from what they're looking for and making it work, but the things you might not think of traditionally really are assets. They are ways to develop skills that apply to work.
One quick comment and the last question. A quick comment from Frank Perez, who points out the panic that a lot of executives, organizational managers feel because of the push for digitalization, for digital transformation, changing their business models, changing the way they work, changing how they can manage people. And it's a whole new world that they have to adapt to. So they're feeling a lot of stress and panic for that. The last question is, I think you may have answered it in your last answer, but Michael asks, how do you convince a company to hire you during a pandemic?
You know, that's a hard question. We're doing a lot of interviewing right now, and I have, for example, a candidate that I need her no matter what. I don't even have a position for her yet, but I want her. And for me, what it is she has been able to explain to me how her skill set, which is nothing like, it's not what I'm looking for. It's not what I'm looking for. It just doesn't have exact experience that matches. She's basically been able to tell me exactly how she is going to come in and add value right away. She understands the role. She asked when I first started talking to her to meet with the other person that's already on my team in that role to get a better understanding of what the day-to-day would be like. She took advantage of the fact that we have resources available publicly online at Stanford for the different roles. So she did a little research into, based on the posting and some of the words used in the posting, figuring out kind of what it would be like. And it was just so impressive to me that she did the research on not just the company. You know, people all the time are like, oh, Stanford's great, I want to work at Stanford. She told me why she wanted that job, how she was going to immediately be able to come in and make an impact. She addressed the fact that not having direct experience wasn't going to limit her because she has had so much experience and been so successful that she's been able to demonstrate that she does learn quickly. You don't just want to say, I'm a quick learner. Show them that you're a quick learner. I can now say on my resume, in 10 months, less than that, I went from entry level to manager because I'm a quick learner, because I'm agile, because I'm adaptive. Those are great opportunities to really demonstrate, again, not just that I have this exact matching skill set, and that might affect people differently based on the job they're looking for, but this is how I am going to add value and make an impact in the role. And as a manager, all I heard was, this is how I'm going to make your life easier and keep the business moving forward.
The old adage of don't come to me with problems, bring me solutions. Right?
Absolutely. Being solutions focused, I cannot emphasize enough. It's not that I don't want people to bring up problems when they exist, but if you constantly point out issues with no solutions, then I'm not going to think very highly of your ability to problem solve. I'm just going to think of your ability to try to figure out how to not do your work well. Problem solving, solutions focused, those are important. And I saw someone had a question about how you talk about gaps in your resume. Be honest, be transparent, and really, talk about what you've learned, what you've done in that time. If you've done 3 or 4 different development opportunities, oh my gosh, that's amazing. If you've been taking care of your kids and balancing, a job search, those are assets. You might not get that job right away, but stay connected to people. I've had good interviews, and I send people that I've had good interviews with positions that are open in other departments. I've referred them to other people. Stay connected even if you don't get a job, if you can.
We did have a question from somebody that I'm responding to, talking about whether to take a training, like a digital certification course. Will that guarantee a job? And I was just mentioning to them that Simplilearn has some of our programs do have job assist. Some of our programs even have a job guarantee, but those are in specific areas, and I never recommend anybody going into one of those areas unless it's something that they're already interested in and would want to build a career into, because it's usually not worth it just to take a job just for the sake of having a job. But in this particular instance, Erica is saying that She feels pigeonholed as a tourism graduate, and so she is looking to broaden out into other things like digital technology. So again, it's important to know that. So if you have questions about that, I've put into the chat box a few times the information about our Simplilearn free program called Skill Up. And if you follow that link and if you go through our website, you'll encounter some of our other courses as well. Skill Up doesn't include the Job Assist, but our other courses do. And Skill Up is a good way to get started in a particular area, especially if you're looking at a transition from one career to another, to say, oh, this is something I'm interested in because I think this video course I'm taking is really cool. And then you can decide if you want to go for a full course that includes the live online classroom and that type of thing. So with that, okay, and they're saying that the link is not reachable. If you can't get the link to work from the chat, do copy that link and put it into your browser directly, because the link, I think, is correct. And if not, email me. My contact is in the emails you've been receiving about the webinar. So with that, I want to thank Miriam for being so very generous with her time and her expertise. And I will put into the webinar chat window
are what we need to go to become stronger and more resilient. The people I meet who got where they are very linearly are the people who struggle the most when they get to those higher level positions. They're not doing well because they're too focused on the only thing they know. The people who I see who are most successful have a diversity of experience that they understand how to synthesize into the skill set needed to be successful at work.
And also, the people who have never encountered adversity tend to crumble when they first encounter it. So
absolutely, you know, we had people freaking out during the pandemic, and then we had plenty of people who are like, I've had much worse things happen, and I'm going to get through this too. So we will all get through this too.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I want to mention that we will have another webinar 2 days from now, Thursday, 9 o'clock India time in the evening and 8:30 a.m. California time, 11:30 a.m. East Coast. It is about product development, and we have the Group Vice President of Oracle CX Marketing, Shrishti Sofat, who will be talking about product development and product management. We did have a question from someone who's interested in learning about product management, so this is the perfect webinar for that. I am going to drop the link for that into the chat now. And again, if the link in the chat doesn't work when you click on it, copy it into your browser. And with that, we will end the event. The ways you can keep in touch with Simplilearn are all basically at Simplilearn on our various social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'd love to keep in contact with you, and we'd love to help you with your personal career development. We look forward to seeing you at future Simplilearn webinars and as part of the Simplilearn learner community. So thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.